Any country which loses control of its borders is, in fact, subjecting itself to a form of peaceful invasion. The only place that is England is England. The only place that is Australia is Australia. Have an obligation first and foremost to our own countries. Any fight between China and America over Taiwan is going to be a very serious fight, because it would almost certainly involve conflict on the Chinese mainland. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge in particular are the world's greatest universities because they've attracted the very best. But this idea that somehow you help those at the bottom by dragging down those at the top, it's just dead wrong. Academic socialism will be no more successful than economic socialism was, and we know that socialism in all its forms, all its guises, ends up immiserating people. Will we send a stabilisation force to assist Britain in Ukraine? Why not?
Tony, thank you for joining me today on Outpost. I wanted to start back at Oxford University, where you studied. Now, you're a Rhodes Scholar, and you will have seen the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. And in the last week, Oxford and Cambridge has said they're going to dilute academic standards for entry into Oxford and Cambridge in order to hit diversity targets. What do you make of all this?
It's insanity. I mean, Oxford and Cambridge in particular are the world's greatest universities because they've attracted the very best. Now, over the years, the very best have been a very diverse group of people. But this idea that somehow you help those at the bottom by dragging down those at the top, it's just dead wrong. Academic socialism will be no more successful than economic socialism was, and we know that socialism in all its forms, all its guises, ends up immiserating people.
So when you became Prime Minister, a lot of the issues that leaders are facing today are very similar to that you face. Immigration, spiraling government debt, global wars, Russia, China, ISIS. You also started what looks like that was the first government Doge. Do you think you were sort of ahead of the game compared to the issues that we face now?
Look, I suspect that the long march of the left through the institutions was probably a building wave back a decade or so ago. I think it's now a breaking wave. I think it's now a dissipating push. I suppose I was up against it when it was at its strongest. Now, in part because of the inherent contradictions, reality always trumps ideology in the end, in part because of its inherent contradictions, in part because it's running up against reality, in part because people like Trump and others have successfully campaigned against it. Maybe the ideas that I was pushing a decade or so back, maybe their time has finally come. I don't know. The important thing is not to, I suppose, recriminate or regret about the past. The important thing is to try to make the most of the present and the future.
Well, it's never been easy being a pioneer, but there is a lot we can learn from Australia. We have our own immigration small boat crisis. You have the Asian boat crisis. How do you go about dealing with that?
With an absolute determination to stop it. Any country which loses control of its borders, any country which can't control a wave of people seeking to enter illegally, is in fact subjecting itself to a form of peaceful invasion. That's what it is, a form of peaceful invasion. And the fact that they're not coming with guns doesn't mean that they're not in their own way violating your sovereignty. Now, I can understand why tens of thousands, if not tens of millions of people, I can understand why they would like to come and live in Australia. Who wouldn't like to come and live in Australia? I can understand why they'd like to come and live in England. Who wouldn't want to come and live in England? I mean, these are the greatest countries on earth. But those of us in positions of influence in our countries have a duty to those who are already here, a duty to keep the character of our countries. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing ever changes. That doesn't mean that we don't have immigrants. That doesn't mean that we don't find much to respect and admire in the culture of other places and other peoples. But the only place that is England is England. The only place that is Australia is Australia. And the Australian government, leadership, elites, to use a word, have an obligation first and foremost to our own countries.
When you were Prime Minister, I was actually a soldier. I was just finishing my time after 10 years in the British Royal Marines, and I had just done a third tour of Afghanistan. Fast forward to today, we know that the entire campaign ended in a great tragic calamity. Was it a strategic mistake to get involved in those campaigns? And was it a distraction from what really is the real threat in Russia and China?
I don't think it was a strategic mistake, because I think that where you can help, you try to help. Where you can make a difference, you try to make a difference. Even at the time, I think there was much that was misguided about those campaigns, but I don't think in their fundamental objective they were mistaken. I mean, let's take first of all the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Saddam was a monster, an absolute monster, and given that he could be got rid of, given that he was in violation of various UN resolutions, I think it was fair enough to get rid of him. The problem was that the good guys, if I can use that term, had a plan for the war, but no plan for the peace. Now, best thing that could have happened in Iraq, once Saddam had gone, would have been the restoration of the monarchy. But we know what the Americans are like about monarchies. The next best thing would have been to have said to Saddam's least bad general, you take charge, we will give you as much support as we can on two conditions. A, no genocide against your own people, and B, no terrorism against our people. We didn't do that. We were conned by some spivs in Washington into thinking that they had some kind of democratic legitimacy. We disbanded the Iraqi army, which meant that there was 500,000 unemployed guys with guns, and we disbanded the Ba'athist civil service, which meant that no one knew how anything worked. The place descended into chaos, and obviously the Islamist insurgents took advantage of it. Now, in Afghanistan, the lawyer Jirga, as I understand it, in late 2001, did petition the Americans for the return of the king. Naturally, the Americans, imagining that this was somehow the restoration of George III, said no. And so we had an attempt to have a kind of a Western-style democracy in what was essentially a clan-based feudal society. It was brave, it was noble, but it was always deeply fraught. I mean, think of the countries in that part of the world that work. Morocco, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, at least up to a point, the Gulf states. They're all the monarchies, and they work because the king wants his grandson to be in the same position that he is, so he can't piss anyone off that badly. So, notwithstanding the fact that kingship has a bad rap in America in particular, about being a sort of a dictatorship by birth. No. Monarchy is a very consensual system because there's a concept of tradition, of order, I suppose, things flowing down in a fashion which is in accordance with nature, and it works well in these societies. And frankly, in a different form, it works very well in the countries which have a share in the British monarchy.
Well, it works for us, and of course there is a Republican movement in Australia. But I just want to come back to that point of the damage it has done reputationally to Britain's armed forces, to America, and whether that's actually emboldened emboldened ISIS, emboldened Russia to invade, further invade Ukraine.
But James, I don't think the Iraq war or the Afghanistan campaign damaged the professional reputation of the British or the American armies. Sure, there were occasional mistakes, one or two outbreaks of ill discipline, I suppose, but you've got to take your hat off to the professionalism of the soldiers involved in those campaigns. The problem, I suppose, was in the end, particularly in Afghanistan, a weariness. I mean, what was the cliche? You've got the watches, we've got the time.
The Taliban.
And they just decided to wait us out and wear us out. Now, in the old days of the British Empire, 4,000 Indian civil servants, perhaps 10,000 British troops in an Indian army of maybe 200,000 or 300,000 could keep a vast country in good order and governance. In the old days, in places like Afghanistan, the British resident and perhaps one or two regiments, and I know there were some disasters in Afghanistan too, could do enormous good, I guess because of the balancing of forces, dare I say it, the divide and rule tactics. It didn't have to be done the way it was sought to be done in more recent times, and there were earlier models that could have worked well, I believe. But look, part of the zeitgeist is that no one knew anything until our time, and therefore we've got to do it all again from scratch. I think it was, as I said, it was weakness of will and forgetfulness of history which got us into the difficulties that we did get into in both Iraq and Afghanistan. But we shouldn't think that these were benighted exercises from the beginning. Wrong. In their own way, they were noble exercises, and particularly those involved at the lower levels, the soldiers and the civilian staff that were attempting to make systems work, wholly admirable, and those people are to be deeply admired.
You don't think the lessons from it should perturb us from getting involved in conflicts elsewhere? Because one of the hot topics, as you know, right now is surrounding Trump, Zelensky, Russia, and this forced deal in Ukraine.
Well, lest anyone think for a second that nation building in inverted commas can't work, just think of what happened in both Germany and Japan after the Second World War. Both countries consumed with a noxious ideology, a particularly evil ideology in the case of Germany, both utterly defeated, both completely rebuilt, both now, whatever their faults and failings, on balance, wonderful countries. And I would say both of them utterly purged of the militarism that had caused so much problems in earlier times. The difference, I guess, between what happened after 1945 in Germany and Japan and what happened in more recent times in Afghanistan and Iraq, well, there's two differences. A, the fundamental differences in the level of, I suppose, this is going to sound a bit, I suppose, patronising, but the level of economic and cultural sophistication, as it were, economic and scientific sophistication, and familiarity with democracy and so on in the societies, and more importantly, the readiness of magnanimous victors to stay the course and build a peace. I mean, let's face it, the British Army of the Rhine was in Germany for 40 odd years after 1945. There's still some American forces in Germany even now. That's the difference. Back then we were prepared to stay the course. We weren't prepared to stay the course now.
Well, absolutely. But in those conflicts, Australia was really supporting part of NATO, supporting British, American troops. But now Australia finds itself essentially on a front line in the Pacific. Today we've seen that there's a Chinese frigate closer than ever to Australia. It's a sort of show of force.
Yep.
How important has this AUKUS pact between UK, America and Australia, well, how important is it for Australia?
Well, the great thing about the AUKUS pact is not just that we will eventually get an Australian nuclear submarine, but it really re-engages Britain in our part of the world because really since the early 70s, Britain has been a bit in retreat from what you call the Far East and what we call the Near North. I think it's really important to have global Britain engaged globally. I certainly think that AUKUS is not a pact for the Pacific. AUKUS is a global operation, and it means that the three great English-speaking powers will be intimately involved strategically at every level in all of the various operations that are needful around the world. So I don't see why, should Britain, for argument's sake, take the lead in a stabilisation force in Ukraine subsequent to some ceasefire, should that be what transpires, I don't see why Britain, under the umbrella of AUKUS, wouldn't say to Australia, well, we'd like you to be involved to make a significant contribution. Australia, let's face it, over the years has sent very substantial military forces to Gallipoli, to France, to North Africa, to Syria. We have quite an expeditionary tradition in our country, and were we to send a stabilisation force to assist Britain in Ukraine, why not?
Well, I loved serving alongside Aussies in Afghanistan, and they've become mates for life that I always catch up with. But I'd say that any leader, political leader, that is going to be leading a country between now and 2030 is potentially facing China invading Taiwan.
Correct.
China has stated he wants it to be united.
Repeatedly.
So if we take them at face value, what would you do if you were leader of Australia, and what do you think the response will or should be from Britain, America, the West?
Well, obviously America has a very strong institutionalised commitment through the Taiwan Act to Taiwan. It's not quite a formal military alliance, but it is a very substantial formal commitment to the safety of Taiwan. America also has a formal military alliance with Japan, and I suspect in the event of any Chinese attack on Taiwan, the Japanese would certainly seek to defend Taiwan because they see it as a vital national interest of theirs. And were that to happen, I think there would be a Chinese attack on Japanese military bases that would trigger the American alliance with Japan, and I can't see that America would be involved in the defence of Japan and Taiwan without seeking to invoke the ANZUS Treaty. So we would be involved, and frankly it would be disappointing if Britain were not also there to help its friends under such circumstances. Now let's be very clear.
You're talking about World War here, though.
Any fight between China and America over Taiwan is going to be a very serious fight. At least as serious as the Korean War, probably much more serious, because it would almost certainly involve conflict on the Chinese mainland.
So we're talking millions, Dad.
As well as conflict in the Taiwan Strait and elsewhere. I think we must move heaven and earth to avoid such a conflict, and the only way to avoid it is peace through strength. Weakness is provocative. If Xi Jinping thinks he can get away with an attack on Taiwan, he will be tempted to do it. And the best way to persuade the commissars in Beijing that this would be against their long-term national interests would be for them to know in advance that any attack on Taiwan would not just pit 1.4 billion Chinese against 25 million Taiwanese, but it would be China against the world, and if not against the world, certainly against a strong alliance of democracies.
So Britain has completely undermined its armed forces, gutted it out, hollowed it out. We face a number of issues here. They've been discussed widely at this conference at ARC in London. Do you see a hope for Britain, or really are we looking at a lost cause?
Look, Britain is never a lost cause. Britain's been through bad times before, even conquest, if we go back to 1066. I mean, the Britain of the Wars of the Roses was a pretty miserable place. The Britain of the Civil War was a pretty miserable place. I guess the Britain that emerged exhausted from the Great War had quite a few problems. The Britain of the late 1970s was not great. I can remember a newspaper headline in Australia in the late 1970s, and it was the cover of the Bulletin magazine, and there was a Union Jack disappearing beneath the waves, and the headline was "Britain has sunk." Well, Britain rose magnificently under Margaret Thatcher, and Britain can and will come again. But yes, things do look to be at a low ebb now.
Well, you're keeping yourself very busy at this conference and generally. Could we see a return to frontline politics for Tony Abbott?
I think I'm now very much in, I don't want to say elder statesman mode, because I think that I'm putting tickets on myself, but I think I'm in kind of commentator-in-chief mode. I think that's me, doing my best to say the things that need to be said, but which the people in office can't always say.
So one final prediction. This year, Down Under, we have the Lions Tour and we have another Ashes. Who's going to win?
Well, I've got to say Australia, but in the end it will be rugby and cricket that are the winners.
Yeah, well, I'll put a bet with you. Pint of London Pride that it's a 2-0 to Britain.
Let's hope you have to buy me, all right?
Yeah.
Good on you, James.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you.